Okay, we're recording. For sound sync, can you see me in that shot?
Yeah.
Or am I like out of it?
Oh, now you're out of it. Now you're in it.
Okay, so I might have to lean in a little bit right here in the beginning. I'm also like super bright. If anything, I won't even use that shot because I've been doing the split screen a lot, and I feel like that looks pretty good. Do you like it?
Yeah, I like that too. Looks great.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So welcome to episode 4 of Thought Mining Podcast. I'm Derek Olson, and this is my esteemed co-host, Dr. Nathan Anderson. And we're here to just deep dive into the unconscious, into the deep subversive layers of unknowns beneath the surface.
That sounds really good.
Yeah. So it's actually been a while. It's been a couple of weeks since we did our last one, even though, you know, in the time, as we release these, it's not going to probably seem like it, but it's been like probably 3 weeks since we did an episode, I think.
Yeah, it has been a bit. I'm not too sure what the delay has been, but we have things. Life has caught up, and got us busy in other directions. But here we are. We're back.
Yeah. How does it feel to be back?
It feels really good. It feels comfortable.
Right. I think so. I'm at home.
Yeah.
I'm at home in front of the camera. That's where I need to be.
It's a good place to be. Good place to be.
Yeah. And so that's actually one thing. It's a good transition. Just talking about being in front of camera and things in life that are that there's resistance around. Things like maybe public speaking or things like that, where sometimes we want to do them, but there's some voices in our head that are saying we're not good enough to do it, or you can't do it, or it's not going to work out, you're going to do it wrong, or whatever that is. And so sometimes we, without even really having the conversation with ourselves, say no to something when it probably should be a yes, right?
Yeah.
And so an example of this that we were just talking about before the podcast started was I recently took a trip to Mexico. And I actually studied Spanish in high school for 4 years and 2 years in college. And I've always still had, even with all of that studying, I had a lot of resistance around striking up an actual conversation with a Spanish-speaking person and just committing to it and not going into English mode and not pantomiming and just kind of like being like, yeah, I can speak this, and let's have this conversation. And so an example previously of a time I tried to do this. So people think, because I lived in California for a lot of years, and people think like, oh, you lived in California, you must have lots of opportunity to practice your Spanish. And I think that's probably was true, but I never took those opportunities because everybody in California speaks really good English. If they're a native Spanish speaker, usually they've already got English mastered. And so it makes more sense to speak in English that they speak pretty well than to go into my like broken Spanglish. So a lot of times I just wouldn't take that opportunity, even though if I did, I know that it would have been received warmly, but there was that nervousness. And so like one example is like one time I was in a taco place and I had just gotten back from like a Spanish meetup where you meet people and practice your Spanish, and I was like feeling good about it. And so I went in there and I tried to talk to this person, and they just didn't understand what I was saying, and I just like reverted to English, and like it was such a like whatever traumatic experience for me that like I just created a lot of fear around striking up a conversation and trying to commit to like, I know this language and I know I can like navigate this conversation. And one thing I was comparing it to in our previous conversation that we were having before the podcast started was there's certain things that have given me paralytic fear in the past where I would just get paralyzed. I'm not sure paralytic is even a word, but by the way, I would just feel kind of paralyzed in the moment. And one of them was like being on camera and like looking into the camera lens, right? Something about it is just really intimidating. It's like looking dead in someone's eyes maybe, but they're not blinking. And you just like, I got to be entertaining. I got to come up with something. And because you're in that mode where you're like, you feel that you have to do something in this moment, it just kind of seems like it just, everything just short circuits, And another place in my life that I felt that was I took like a class of improv one time, right? And so improv, it's like they'll hand you very sparse skeleton of a situation, and then you're supposed to go in and kind of like be fun and be entertaining with this little bit of information, and there's like a bunch of people watching you. So something about the fact that I want to be good and I want to be entertaining and I want to be seen becomes paralyzing when you don't have time to plan it out, you know, because it's one thing, like, let's say I've never like necessarily had a problem with getting on stage and delivering lines, right? Because you always have something you can fall back on. You have the lines, you memorized them. If you forget what's going on, you could skip a line and just keep going, just keep rolling with it. You're showing up with something. You're showing up with a bag, you know, and it's your lines. But with something like an improv, or even trying to speak to someone in another language that you're like have a tenuous grasp on, or getting in front of the camera, it's all, you know what I just realized as I was saying this?
What's that?
It requires like absolute presence.
Yes.
And maybe that's where like the fear comes from to an extent, because you can't get in your head in any of those situations. If you get in your head, you're done. Right?
Yeah.
And that's where the paralysis is. The minute it's like the minute the analysis or the planning or the whatever happens, you're just dead. So that's the situation is very unforgiving in that if you leave the present, if you leave the now, you're lost. You know, if you're trying to listen to someone speak in another language, if you drift, oh, they're gone. You know what I mean? Yes. You don't know, you know, because like, firstly, sometimes when someone's speaking Spanish for me, my uptake's a little slow, so I'm still interpreting it for a second or two after they've said it. So, you know, with English, I think it's like you talk to me and it's almost an instantaneous response, or seemingly, but even though like there is some processing going on, with Spanish, it's just like a slow computer. It's like you got to wait for that.
Yes.
Now I know what they said, and then, you know, so.
Have to be fully attentive to it.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm wondering what you think about what I just said and how you feel about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the presence component of that. You know, I hadn't really thought about it through that lens before, but it makes so much sense as soon as you allow your mind to get in the way and start thinking about what might somebody think of me as I'm saying this or behaving in this way or projecting this part of myself. You know, how am I going to be perceived? Then you ultimately start like questioning. I feel like I'm doing it right now, to be honest. I'm like, am I thinking about what people are going to perceive of me as I'm talking on here?
Once you introduce the parallel thread, right? So you've got your thread about what you need to say, and then you've got the sort of watchman parallel thread that kind of comes in and starts watching what you're saying and looking at, you know, it's observing your present state. So you're splitting in two, and one of them's the cop and one of them's the robber or whatever. You know, that's not great, whatever, but they're playing different roles,
right?
You know, that are almost antagonistic or can be antagonistic if not, you know, managed in the right way. So like, what do you think, Nathan? What do you think is the better option? Do we try to suffocate this voice in the moment, or can they move together?
It seems like they could likely move together. The one might just naturally dissolve as you become, as you sort of enter into a state of presence. I know as I'm kind of carrying through various tasks in my day, if I sort of settle into a rhythm or a zone of sorts, that other voice doesn't really seem to present itself all that much. It might still be sort of in the background, but I'm not necessarily listening to it. The chatter might be there, but I just don't notice it because I'm so immersed in the task that I'm currently in. It's such a fascinating topic to ponder and think through. I know just the more I let my mind get in the way, the less likely I am to really, I guess, do my best work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another thing too is there's sort of, I think within the artistic world, and I just saw this on like a YouTube the other day, but there's this concept of just first instinct. You know what I mean? What's your first instinct? Take your first instinct. You know what I mean? Just go and then go on to your next thing and use your first instinct, and this is how you're going to be able to get this thing done, right, without too much self-doubt creeping in. And, once you start to get on your third, fourth interpretation of a thing, like, well, originally I saw it that way, but now I can see maybe it's like this. And then you say, well, what if someone thinks it's like that? And, then you start thinking like a lot more too complex about something, that can be like a real roadblock, to getting. But then how do we learn to trust our first instinct when we've all had experiences where our first instinct was clearly wrong?
Yeah, I think if it's repeatedly wrong over and over again, then it's really a difficult.
But what is wrong, right? So like the concept of wrong too. That's something that I think get beaten into us through school, or maybe disciplinarian parents or whatever it is. But I think everybody that grew up in the United States to some extent that I've ever met has some sort of difficulty dealing with the gray area. It's always kind of like yes, no, black, white, ones and zeros. We have this tendency to want it to be true or false, whether or not we've forced ourselves into this mental box through conditioning, or whether it's just a natural thing for humans. I don't know.
Yeah. It's so hard to go back. I don't think it's even really possible to go back and make a decision different from the one that you made. You can't really erase a decision that has been made. I know it makes me think of growing up. My mom would always say something like, whatever choice you make is the right choice, because it has to be. You have to live with whatever the consequences are of the choice that you made and carry on. You make an adjustment based on the consequences of the choice that you made. And but if you make a choice and then you kind of reflect back on it and you're like, oh, that was wrong, that was so bad, that was, I got to go back and change it, but you can't really change it. It's just like I made a choice, it didn't produce the outcome that I was hoping that it would produce. So as I move on and carry on with my life, I'm going to maybe make a different choice the next time I'm presented with the same types of circumstances, but I can't really erase what I did. So it was right for the path of my life.
Right. But some of us, I think, also tend to repeat bad decisions, even though we know it was a bad decision. So that's a whole other pathology we could probably get into.
Yeah.
But
right.
A tendency to almost relive the certain things that we didn't enjoy the first time and just get caught in a cycle. But I think that's probably too complex to get into with this conversation.
It might be. I don't know. Maybe that's something that we put in our bank of ideas. For
I feel like you could make a whole book about it or something like that. And a lot of people would probably be interested in curing that issue. Whether it's something curable or whether it's just part of our the way we are. You had an interesting dream that I think kind of, or it was a dream, right?
Yeah, it was a dream. It was several years ago, but it's been popping up in my mind. I've been thinking about it, I guess, really since we started working on this project, because it seems to have some parallels with I think what maybe both of us might be experiencing to an extent. I guess as far as kind of working towards something and then maybe being a little bit hesitant to put it out. This is our 4th episode. We've been recording over the course of maybe a month or so, month and a half, and we haven't really formally released anything yet. And
so it's like our private podcast.
What are we? Why are we hesitant to do it? But so that dream pops up in my mind as.
Do you want to describe it?
Parallels. Sure, I will. I will read it here. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, as I have talked about on previous episodes, if I have things going through my mind, I'll write them. And sometimes when I wake up and I have had a vivid dream, I will jot it down. Sometimes I jot down the details of it. Other times I'll jot down the details and an interpretation, which I did this time, but I'm not going to read the interpretation of it, I don't think, but I'll read the dream itself. And then we can see maybe sort of the parallels between the details of the dream and maybe this project a little bit. So I don't remember when this was actually, but I think it was probably, based on where it shows up in my journal, it wasn't dated, but it was probably 15 years ago or so. So some of these things still sort of live with me. Yeah. When you write them down, they sort of take on a more tangible component of life. So I was walking up a path, a narrow path about 3 feet wide. It was sloped slightly upward and covered with dirt and small rocks. Tall trees and other natural vegetation surrounded the trail. It seemed to be in the middle of a forest. I don't remember entering the forest. I just remember being in the forest and walking on the trail. The path was clearly defined, and evidence of previous travelers existed. Small structures, creatively designed with branches and vegetation from the forest, sporadically decorated the path. As I moved forward, I was required to walk around, climb over, or crawl through the structures that appeared. The progressive pace was slow and steady, and eventually led me to a park-like, wide open space. Trees still surrounded this area, but the open space was much larger than the path, about the size of a baseball field. Shortly ahead of me was a single tree standing in the middle of the open space. I paused for a moment to look at the tree and continued to walk. I was drawn to what was in the distance. It appeared to be a large concrete structure, occupied by living creatures. As I moved closer, I realized that the creatures were lions. One of the lions, appearing to be the king of the community, started walking in my direction. I became overridden with fear, walked toward the tree, and climbed it as I watched the lion proceed to his destination. He was on his way to a quiet place for a moment of rest, and he sat down when he arrived. As he began to rest, his eyes glanced toward me, and he noticed me standing in the tree. I felt like I was somewhere I didn't belong when he began to speak to me. He was a lion, but he had the voice of a man and began to take the form of a human when he talked. He had an intimidating look in his eye, and while reaching for something, he asked if I was ready to hear some noise. I reluctantly said yes and thought he might shoot me. Thankfully, shooting a gun wasn't part of his plan. He said, "I hope you like the buzzing sound of bees." He pulled out a jar of bees and was opening them to send my way. He asked if I had any open wounds because he wanted to make sure that the bees made it to the wounds if I had any. At that time, my fear of being stung multiple times, perceiving that the stinging might even cause death, prompted me to wake up. Now those are the details of the dream, and then I went on to interpret that through the lens of a different project. But did anything sort of surface in your mind, I guess, as you were?
Well, a lot, yeah. So when you came to the open field, right? So I saw, what I interpreted was that, there's something maybe that you need to get to, but there's going to be things in the way, right? So you're climbing over these structures. I think they're not impossible to climb over, but they're not lacking challenge, right? So there is some effort that's required, and not only that, but either faith or bravery or whatever it is that it's not dangerous, and so you're going to go into this essentially dark forest and climb over all this stuff, and it's you don't know what's waiting for you, but then there's this clearing, right? So then there's this opening, and then there's something special, right? There's something special. It's a tree, and it's beyond the resistance. It's beyond, and then it's waiting for you. So you're gonna find it. But the bees thing, right? So the bees thing, to me, what I thought is that whatever it is that you need is going to be masked in something terrorizing, right? Or if not terrorizing, seemingly terrorizing, right? So the bees haven't harmed you. It doesn't mean you have to go through getting stinged 1,000 times, but you do have to grapple with the thought of being stinged, right? Grapple with, to walk into the scorpion pit or whatever, you know what I mean? And be like calm and to be able to do that without fear, right? So that's life in a lot of ways, right? That's doing improv or like getting on camera a little bit. There's the possibility of the stinging, and there's a possibility that you and I are embarrassing ourselves right now on this show, right? Someone's watching it and they're like, "Oh, these idiots, dorks," or whatever it is, So we have to wrestle with that, the sting of that kind of rejection that could happen, and almost probably invariably will, right? Somebody's not going to like it. Is it our fault that they don't like it? Maybe we could cater to them more, or maybe there's something inauthentic about us. Is it their fault? Maybe they have some past trauma around, a guy that looked like me, did something nasty to this person, and they just don't like guys like me, and immediately write me off from when they see me, or just, oh, who do you think you are? You're getting up on, you're not a famous person, you can't get on camera, whatever it is. So there's always ways that you can face penalties for trying something in earnest, if that makes any sense. And the penalties are coming from other individuals, usually with either their negative psychic energy, or they're gonna send negative words toward you to harm you, or whatever it is. So it is, to me, like the whole, like what this dream, what I would interpret it would be that, something like there's, the king of the lions is the one who's doing this, right? He's the one who's releasing these bees to you. What's the king of the lions trying to tell you? You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't seem like he wants to eat you. You know what I mean? Maybe he just wants to teach you something. Maybe it's one of those harsh lessons that like a father teaches, where it's like, yeah, this is gonna hurt, but you're gonna learn something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that makes a lot of sense to me. He's the one that is sort of saying, you're gonna get stung, or you might get stung. These are the potential stingers that are gonna come after you. You're in this tree. You're stuck in this tree with nowhere to go. You have no choice but to stand there and take whatever comes at you, and then you'll know that after the stinging is done, or if maybe it's just the buzzing, maybe it doesn't, maybe they don't sting you, but if they do sting you and they do get to your wounds, you're going to make it out on the other side, and you're going to be able to proceed to that big concrete structure of success, or whatever it is that you're. I
almost thought too that maybe the bees weren't like, they're not going for your wounds, like they don't like smell blood, but something about what they're going to do is going to heal those wounds.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it might hurt, but the healing will occur.
Well, there's this one thing that bees do to defend themselves against the Asian murder hornets. Have you seen this?
I haven't. No.
What they do is they surround them, and then just like the buzzing and the vibration or whatever is going on from like surrounding them will overheat the murder hornet to death, because they have to like have their body temperature at a certain, and so these murder hornets are like awful. They'll kill thousands of bees, but the one defense mechanism they've been able to do is like just gang up on them, trap them, and overheat them.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So, not that has anything to do with this, but maybe they're just going to like buzz around these wounds and like heal them up.
Yeah.
Like provide some healing energy.
Oh, that's so cool. That's such a cool way to look at it. Yeah. Let's see. Kind of going back toward the beginning stages of that, walking up that path that people have walked before, trying to draw some parallels between this podcast project and sort of like the metaphor of the dream, thinking about like there have been people who have podcasted before. There are lots of podcasts out there. People have gone through the process, and there are little steps that you have to take along the way that if you haven't done a podcast before, you have to know how to do things that you'll figure out along your way. These I see as sort of like these little obstacles or these little structures that we go through. You have to come up with a theme for the show. You have to come up with a title for the show. You have to know how to record the audio. If you're doing video, you got to know how to record the video. You have to know how to distribute. You have to know how to like edit. You have to know how to sign up or put your stuff on a podcasting platform or on YouTube or wherever it goes. So
marketing too. You could do all of that stuff, and then you don't have anybody to watch it. Because that's one of the things that's I think the most frustrating about trying to be creative is like there's such different thought processes, one distribution and publicity and marketing versus the creative process of being the creator. So some people maybe are good at both, but usually one person's good at one or the other. And so for that reason, a lot of people who are good at marketing become creatives and become successful creatives, and they're not really that quote unquote creative. So that's why you get like a lot of like, let's say, copycat material out there, because people are like, well, this worked, so I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that. And, you know what I mean? So it's not, that to me isn't the creative process, or at least Rick Rubin wouldn't probably call that creativity.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's more like copy and paste, but I know the ways to get it out there. And then people are like, wow, you're so creative. It's like, yeah, because nobody saw the thing that you ripped off.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because nobody's digging into like real creative people that have 5 viewers or whatever. So, I mean, I think that's, I don't know why I got on a tangent there. It's almost...
No, it's good though.
But to me, they are very different. So, like, usually... someone's good at one or the other. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And both of us are probably more on the creative side, I say, than the businessy marketing mover and shaker sort of side of things. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, maybe we just, need to make the AI do that part, or hire somebody or whatever. Because I don't know if I'll ever be good at like singing my own praises from the mountaintops. It's just always, for whatever reason, I have a lot of resistance around that. And people that really get successful a lot of times don't, right? So they are singing their own praises, and for whatever reason they can kind of like figure out a way to get away with it without being like, oh, you arrogant jerk, look, you think you're so great or whatever. But they can do it like in a more low-key fashion or whatever, and that's the nuance of being skilled at something, right.
It's one of those obstacles along the way. I mean, I guess that maybe we haven't quite gotten to that.
Maybe that's just another obstacle for us.
Kind of still in the narrow portion of the path, but starting to see the field.
How often do you think we say things like, "Oh, I'm just not that type. I'm not the type to do this type of thing. I'm more the type to do that type of thing," when it's really just a matter. It's like being like, "I'm not the type to go swimming. I'm not the type to ride a bicycle," but it doesn't mean that you're not going to be swimming like a fish or flying down the road in your bicycle as soon as you learn how. And then you're gonna be like, oh, I guess I am the type. Right. Because you know how intimidating, like, it's obviously been a long time since we learned to ride a bicycle, so it's probably hard to remember, but like I more recently taught my son to ride a bicycle, and then the like memories start flooding back about when you were a kid and you saw someone riding a bicycle. You're just like, oh crap, like how am I gonna do that? Like they don't have training wheels. They could fall at any moment. You don't really understand how the momentum works and how that it's like once you're on it, you feel very secure. You don't feel like you're going to fall. But when you're like unaccustomed to the feeling of riding a bicycle and you see someone riding it, it's like, how does he not fall over? Right. Like, what's going on? He's going to hit a bump and break his head open.
Yeah, right.
So
right. I feel like we're kind of at that stage where we're kind of like, how do people do it? Like, how do they get their content out there in a way that resonates with or reaches the audience that it's intended to reach, and that it connects with them? And so I feel sort of like we're watching the kid ride the bike right now, being like, we kind of understand the concept of it. We sort of have done all of these steps, these like preliminary tasks to get us to sort of where we're at right now, and now we're sort of wrestling with
now it's just like, don't fall, but you can't really do anything. You're 25 feet away, but you kind of do this anyway, like as if you have the force. Stop.
Right. But we're kind of like visioning, like I'm kind of seeing like the concrete structure on the other side with all of the lions sort of like just relaxing and just kind of soaking up the sun and taking in sort of like this projecting this comfortable energy, on this other structure sort of across from the field. That sort of seems to me like, through the lens of podcasting, it's sort of like the podcasters who have made it essentially, and who like kind of are in this. They've kind of walked the trail. They've walked past the tree. They've taken their stingings that were coming along the way, and they've sort of made it to the other side, and are feeling comfortable where they're at. And now we have one kind of coming back to us, which seems to be just our own sort of subjective perspective of what we might think we might be judged on or something, kind of coming to send little bees our way to see if we can handle the stings.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I might be speaking out of turn by saying that you might be experiencing some of those fears. But
I absolutely. I think part of though is of growing older. I think is taking those fears a little less seriously, just because you've made it through a lot of things, and you're like, I'm not too worse for the wear. I'm dust off, and once you've been through the grinder like 15 times, someone's like, well, you might have to go through the grinder. It's like, well, I've been through the grinder 15 times.
Yeah.
So it becomes less intimidating, though, there's always new grinders to go through or whatever, meat grinders, I guess. Or what other kind of grinders are there? Cheese grinders, wood grinders. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, there's other, I guess, there's always another challenge waiting for you on the side of the challenge you just completed, so
right.
Maybe you've done something similar, but you haven't done the specific thing, so there's always the voice can always pop back up. But that being said, are we past time?
We're like approaching the time here, so I mean,
should we move this into a part 2, do you think, or should we just
we could like wrap up here. Do you think we should wrap up here and then?
Yeah. Do you want to try to give it a shot at the wrap up, or? That's why
we can
put it on you.
Yeah.
There's some peas.
I do appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you. No. On the spot, trying to figure out what was it that we covered here. It had to do with some just discomfort of going into new experiences. You talked a little bit about how you had gone to Mexico, and like how in the past when you were speaking to people in foreign languages and trying to have a conversation with them, you felt some fears, and doing some stand-up was sort of uncomfortable for you. Even sometimes getting up in front of others on camera, although that wasn't quite as difficult for you because you felt like you had some sort of scripted supports to...
Well, one of the things I think that killed my fear of being on camera was because I did so much camera work. Mm-hmm. And I've seen really good, and I've seen really bad. Mm-hmm. And I've seen such bad on camera acting or presenting or whatever that I just know I'll never be that bad. And so that kind of gives me a little bit, I'm like, at least I'm not as bad as that.
Yeah.
That person who was literally being paid for this thing, that just couldn't get their thing. I've seen people struggle just like to say like one sentence, like a simple sentence. They can't get it out, And like we're all sitting there for 15 minutes looking at our watch. I'm like, geez, how'd this guy ever get into this business, And that's when I realized that being on camera is really a lot about saving the crew time. And just, if you got your stuff together and you get through your lines, everybody's just like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
This guy just knew his lines and now we're moving on to the next thing and we don't have to get stuck here forever. And once I realized that part of it and how it's like there's only so much you can control and things, I don't know, it just let me let go a lot, I think.
Being exposed to others who are doing.
But I don't want to get too deep into this because we've got.
Oh yeah, that's right. We're wrapping up, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that kind of led us into some conversation about that. Talking about how being present can really help alleviate some fears, regardless of what it is that you're doing. When you can take your mind out of it, you can be fully immersed in whatever it is that you're engaged in, and that helps to alleviate some potential fears. That I think then led us into a dream that I had, and read the Path to the Lion and the Bees dream that I had, and we talked about how that was related sort of to our podcasting project here, and how we've felt some hesitations to release it, although we've gone a long way so far. So I anticipate that we'll be releasing it in a more formal way relatively soon. But, and that kind of brought us up to the almost 30 plus minutes, and so I think we were about ready at that point in time to close it for the session. What do you think? Yeah, I think that's probably enough for this episode of Thought Mining. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon for our next episode. We'll be back for more. Please give us feedback. Please smash the subscribe button. Please smash that like button.
and support us and help us get over our own fears, but then we'll help you get over yours as well by talking about it.
Yes.
Recontextualizing it and dissecting it to death.
We'll come out in a clear space.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.